The fog sits so thick over the British lines that sentries cannot see to the end of their own wire. Then, 5,000 German artillery pieces open simultaneously, and within seconds, no one can hear anything either. This is not the bombardment the Allies have learned to survive, comprised of week-long drumfire that announces every offensive days in advance, turning the approach routes to mud and giving defenders time to bring up reserves and prepare for exactly what is coming. This barrage lasts 5 hours. Unlike the previous barrages aimed at destroying positions, it attempted to silence them through hits on their communications, command posts, and specific weapons that could break up an assault. When it lifts, the men who come out of the fog are not moving in the Napoleonic lines. They move in clusters of 8 or 10, and they do not stop where the British are strong. They find the gaps and they exploit them. By nightfall, the British Fifth Army has been torn open across a 40-mile front. The Western Front, which has barely moved in 3 years of industrial slaughter, moves that day by miles. Yet, Germany will lose the war in 8 months. The armies that marched in 1914 were organized around a tactical logic that had functioned since the Napoleonic era. Infantry attacked in extended lines, not shoulder to shoulder as a previous century had managed it, but still in chains, close enough for officers to command them with voice and gesture. The rear lines fed forward to reinforce wherever the front line made progress. The cavalry waited behind, ready to pour through any gap. The machine gun was not a new weapon in 1914. Every major army had studied it. What no pre-war study had fully captured was how well a machine gun survived artillery fire. This single weapon, usually tucked into a shell crater or behind a modest earthwork, could absorb a bombardment that appeared from any distance to be annihilating, and then resume firing into the men crossing the open ground. The consequence was a stalemate. At the Somme in July 1916, the British Army took nearly 60,000 casualties in a single day. The tactical doctrine of 1914 was designed for a battlefield that no longer existed, and the process of replacing it was measured in years and bodies. Ernst Junger, a platoon commander who would spend most of the war in exactly the conditions that made the old methods lethal, watched it happen at Guillemont and wrote it down. One battalion after another, crowded into an overmanned front line, pounded to destruction without result. The German Supreme Command was reaching these same conclusions from the opposite end of the chain. By 1915, German doctrine was crystallizing around 4 shifts. Artillery preparation had to be short and precise, rather than long and announced. Attack formations had to thin out dramatically. Infantry and artillery had to coordinate in real time, not in sequence. And the squad, not the platoon or the company, had to become the unit around which everything else organized. The first formal attempt at a solution came on the 2nd of March 1915. The German Supreme Command authorized an experimental detachment in 8th Corps, tasked with testing experimental weapons and tactics to break the Western Front deadlock. The first purpose-built assault unit was the Sturmabteilung Kaslow, commanded by Major Kaslow, and organized around a new Krupp direct-fire gun supposed to kill machine gun positions that regular artillery couldn't reach accurately enough. They were also issued different steel shields to test. Kaslow developed a 4-phase doctrine. First, the soldiers would depart from their initial line position. An advance across no man's land followed. Once the enemy was reached, an assault began on their first line of trenches. The final phase was progressing the attack to ultimately overrun the enemy line. The idea was for the Krupp guns to clear the way, while the steel shields would protect them during the crossing. Kaslow also detailed a separate 3 phases specifically for the Krupp gun. The first phase detailed using them all together to neutralize any obstacles that could obstruct an advance. They were then transported through no man's land, and when within 50 to 70 meters of the enemy line, were to aim and fire upon artillery and machine gun positions. Finally, they were to provide support to the assault wave at the moment they reached the enemy trenches. None of it held up under contact. The guns weren't powerful enough to suppress enemy artillery. The shields were heavier than they were useful. The unit deployed to Artois and took over 30% casualties in a sequence of minor actions before anyone had proven the underlying concept was viable. However, the roots of the tactics were established and would provide a basis for the future of the Stormtroopers. Kaslow's replacement arrived in August 1915. Captain Ernst Rohr, a 37-year-old career soldier. Rohr's contribution came in the form of a redefinition of the Kaslow tactics. Where previous approaches asked how to concentrate enough force to overwhelm a defended position, Rohr asked where the position was weak and how to reach that weakness before the defender could cover it. He stripped the Krupp assault cannons and replaced them with cut-down captured Russian field guns light enough to move with infantry. The assault moved in 3 waves, a lead element that found and punched through chosen penetration points, a second wave that consolidated and widened the breach, a third that reinforced. Flamethrowers stayed hidden until the last moment possible. Every attack was rehearsed in secret, with assault forces moved in advance to the actual objective area, so the men knew the terrain before they crossed it under fire. The success of the attack came down to the elements of the creeping artillery barrage. The assaulting infantry was to be inside the enemy position simultaneously with the last rounds of their own barrage, following the creeping artillery so closely that the defenders had no time between the end of the bombardment and the arrival of German soldiers to climb out and man their positions. By February 1916, the unit had been transferred to Verdun, expanded to full battalion strength by April, and redesignated Storm Battalion No. 5. The initial German assault at Verdun was led by stormtroopers and pioneers. It was the most effective infantry assault the German army had launched since the opening weeks of the war. In May 1916, the German command ordered every army on the Western Front to send 2 officers and 4 NCOs to Rohr's battalion. Those men would learn the methods and return as instructors in their own units. The courses ran 3 weeks. Pupils learned infiltration, trench raiding, improvised demolitions, and how to set a counterattack. The Stormtrooper system turned the NCO into the tactical backbone of every squad, expected to make independent judgments under fire. The German Army's attack manual stated that every attack offered opportunity for independent decision-making, reaching all the way down to the individual soldier. In practice, the spread of this idea was uneven. NCO shortages were a persistent problem, and the quality of instruction varied significantly between armies and corps. Some regiments absorbed the doctrine fully, while others failed to catch on. Additionally, the 1917 manual was explicit that shock troops in defense were just as important as in attack. The elastic defense system formalized in the winter of 1916 placed these same trained men at the center of the German defensive posture. The forward zone held lightly by outposts. The main resistance sighted on reverse slopes, out of sight of Allied artillery observers. Behind that, prepared counterattack forces whose purpose was to hit Allied infantry at exactly the moment an offensive stalled beyond their own artillery's range. The Germans used this effectively enough to isolate entire Allied brigades, cutting them off from resupply and artillery coordination. On the 23rd of October, 1916, Ludendorff formally ordered every German army on the Western Front to form an assault battalion. By December, all 17 had one. Most organized around 2 assault companies, a machine gun company, and a mine launcher company, roughly 1,000 to 1,400 men each. By 1918, the German infantry training manual had been rewritten to reflect this new idea. Squad symbols, to include rifle groups, machine gun groups, mortar teams, were present. 6 of 18 squads in a standard company were now light machine gun squads. The manual's premise was that every German infantryman would fight the way Rohr's battalion had fought in 1916. The OHL's attack doctrine stated the historical connection. The principle that infantry must advance into their own artillery fire had been proven in the assault battalions and now had to become standard practice for everyone. The preparation for March 21st was immense. Stormtroop battalions rehearsed against full-scale replicas of their actual objectives, built from aerial photography accurate enough to show individual buildings. Officers planned with photographs on their tables, and live ammunition was used throughout the training. The artillery preparation was designed by Colonel Bruckmüller, whose methods had been refined across multiple operations. The 5-hour bombardment was targeted suppression, aimed at the specific positions and communications that would allow a coherent British response. Ernst Junger commanded his company in the first wave near Écluse-Maine. His account of that morning was stellar. Bypassed positions, trench lines rolled up from the flank, and men acting on individual initiative because orders weren't coming and weren't needed. The tactical results on March 21st were the most significant single-day advance on the Western Front since 1914. They were the direct product of 3 years of doctrine: the infiltration method, the squad-level initiative, and the short, precise artillery preparation that Bruckmüller and assault battalions had refined together. Even though the system did exactly what it was built to do, it wasn't enough. When the stormtroopers advanced beyond the range of their own artillery, the logic of the system began to work against them. The assault method was designed around heavy weapon support, which needed to be moved. As the advance accelerated, the heavy weapons fell behind, and the leading stormtroopers found themselves in territory their own fire support could not cover. The OHL's doctrine had described this in its attack manual. The first penetration was comparatively easy. The difficulty was sustaining the vigor of the attack, preventing the enemy from recovering before the momentum could reach a decisive result. However, Germany was operating at a disadvantage due to fighting on foreign land. Allied reserves could be moved by train, whereas German infantry moved on foot. The situation in the remaining years was dire for Germany. Although the collapse of Russia freed up German divisions from the Eastern Front, that window was slowly closing. The United States had entered the war in April 1917, and by early 1918, American soldiers were arriving in France at a rate that would make any German advantage irrelevant. By the summer of 1918, roughly 300,000 American troops were landing every month. One could argue, had Germany fought on an equal playing field without the entrance of the Americans, they would have had more success after the spring offensive. The outnumbered troops and support structure they would face was too much to overcome by any tactical doctrine. By the time the major 1918 offensives had run their course, many stormtroop battalions had been burned through. What remained in the German order of battle in autumn 1918 was predominantly the trench divisions, full of older men and young conscripts better suited for defensive holding than attack measures. After 4 years of leading stormtroopers, Junger had reduced it to a principle. All genuine success in the attack came from individual action. The mass provided impetus. Trained individuals provided the result. By late 1918, those individuals were gone. At this point, Germany was outproduced, outmanned, and strategically isolated. Given the disadvantage Germany was playing at, the stormtrooper tactics furthered their survival for a little bit longer and deployed the roots for a tactical change leading into World War II.